Welcome to this video on portrait sculpting for beginners. If you're new to sculpting and you'd like to get into portrait sculpting, or maybe you've tried a portrait sculpture and you've been kind of frustrated because it was harder than you thought it was, this is a video just for you. So let's get into it. So I'm Andrew Joseph Keith. I'm the instructor for the Proco Figure Sculpting Fundamentals course, as well as the Portrait Sculpting course. And the concepts that we're going to cover in this video, I went over in a video on the Proco 3D YouTube channel called 10 Steps to Portrait Sculpting. But I wanted to take those steps and kind of just address them towards beginners, people that are just new to sculpting. So as an example, I'm going to be using this sculpture that I did of my daughter, and we're going to walk through those steps together. Try these steps out. I believe that if you do these steps, if you follow along with these steps, your sculpture has a much greater chance of being a successful sculpture. So the first step is collecting references. You want to make sure that you have references of the model turning around 360. Usually I'll take a video of them just in a swivel chair turning around, or I'll just take pictures one at a time as they turn slowly. But you want to get as many angles as you can, and don't neglect the areas like the back of the head. These are really important to get a sense of how that portrait or how that head exists in the round. Step 2 is making an armature for your sculpture. So you can use a metal pipe and a floor flange. This is what I like to do a lot of the times, 1/2 inch floor flange. That's something that just you can screw down to a wood baseboard and then screw a pipe on top so that it's perpendicular to the flat surface of the board. Then you can add in some newspaper and put some masking tape around that just to build out some of the mass of the sculpture so that you can then add clay on top of that. The third step is the block-in. So for this, I recommend doing what's called the Bodum method block-in, and I learned this from Robert Bodum. And basically, it's just a wedge shape or an axe shape, or you can think of it from above, it's like a triangle that gets wide toward the back part of the head and then tapers towards the front plane of the face along the center line. So it's just like a sharp edge or a wedge. You want this to be nice and thin and small because, again, we're going to be building the forms on top of this. So if it starts out too big, you're going to be carving away, and it's a lot harder to build in those details and get those soft forms when you're carving away with a tool rather than by adding little pieces of clay. So a simple block-in, roughly the shape of the head from the side view, a wedge shape that tapers towards the front plane of the face. Once you've got that block-in, then you can build the side profile or the silhouette of the sculpture. This is one of the most important steps throughout the process because this serves as the foundation of the rest of the portrait. So we're going to actually be using this side profile throughout the rest of the process to place things like the nostrils, the mouth, the eye sockets compared to this dip in the nose between the nose and the forehead. All of those measurements we're going to measure against this profile. So it's essential that you get this profile as accurate as you possibly can. To do this, you just take little pieces of clay and build out that profile one piece of clay at a time, laying that out on the center line of that block-in, and you're only focusing on that one angle, just the side view, putting the piece of clay for the chin, for the mouth, the nose, the forehead, the hairline, getting the shape of the head accurate, and then checking this part of the sculpture. I would recommend either holding your sculpture directly up to your model if you can, or if you can display the reference image of the model and then hold the sculpture up to that reference image that's displayed maybe on a computer screen or something larger behind the sculpture, and then you can close one eye and you can check to make sure that the silhouette of your sculpture aligns exactly with the silhouette of your reference, if it's a picture on a screen of that side view, or of your model that's actually sitting there in front of you if you're fortunate enough to be able to be sculpting directly from the model. You'll probably need to push the features around a little bit. The nose will be too small. There'll need to be usually more clay in the back of the head. Push things around until you get that outline from the side view as close as you possibly can. It's really important. After we've finished step 4, that silhouette, we're going to move on to step 5, which is the skull or the bony structures inside of the portrait. Now, in the portrait sculpting course, I have several lessons that go over the anatomy of the skull. There's also a lesson on the 10 anatomical features of the skull that every artist should know that's on the main Proco channel. And so I'll have links to those videos, but basically What you're looking for is the angle of the eye sockets and the cheekbones and the jawbone, and getting those accurate in relationship to that side profile of the face as well as to the bone structure of your model. So to build out these bony structures, it's usually with those walls of clay that come out from that block-in, and you're just building on top of that block-in to say this is the underlying structure, the bony structure of the skull, upon which all of those fleshy features will be built. So that's step number 5, the bony structures. Number 6 is getting a likeness from the front view. So now you're turning from the side, you've laid in some of the bony structures, now you're going to move on to the front view of the sculpture and start to try to capture the shape of the face from the front view as well as the width of the neck. The shape of the head from the front view is really important as well. Obviously, the shape of each of the features is important, but this side view first and then the front view, if you can get those really accurate, then the likeness should already be coming along even before you get into any of the features. It should start to look like the person if you've done the side view and the front view accurately. But sculpting is hard. This will take some practice, and it will take time to train your eye to be able to see the differences between the reference and your sculpture. If you can, again, hold your sculpture directly up to your reference from the front view, and then close one eye, look through your sculpture at the reference, and then check to make sure that shape from the front view is accurate. The widest point of the skull from the front view is back behind the ears, just a little bit behind the ears and above the ears at the back of the head. And that's typically wider than the cheekbones, which are the widest point of the facial mask, this front part. Now, step number 7 is checking accuracy. There are many ways to do this. My favorite is the sculptor's cheat sheet, what I've been talking about of closing one eye, holding your sculpture directly up to the reference or to the model, and then just looking through your sculpture at the model and being able to align those silhouettes or outlines from each angle. A great way to judge the accuracy. It's much easier to see when you're just focusing on one angle, if that angle is correct, and then you move on and turn both the sculpture and the reference slightly, and then check that angle. And you can really do this like all the way around the sculpture, but especially you want to do this from the front view and from the side view. Some other tricks you can use to check your sculpture. There's an app called the DaVinci Eye app, and that allows you to take a reference image and then overlay that with the camera of your phone so that you can check in real time. You can also use a mirror to check. Just hold it up to a mirror, and that will help you judge the asymmetries that you might not have noticed when you're looking at it. Backing up away from the sculpture, leaving the room, just looking at your reference for a little bit, leave the room, and then come back and look at your sculpture, because over time you kind of get used to the proportions of your sculpture rather than the reference. So there's a bunch of ways of checking the accuracy, but that's important, and that's something that you should be doing through each stage of the process, is checking your sculpture up against the references or against the model if you can. Okay, step number 8. Now we're getting closer to the end, and this one is when you're going to start working all the way around the sculpture. So at this point, you should have the bony features in place, a rough idea of things like the eye socket, the parietal ridge, which is this part, this kind of rhythm that goes back towards the side of the head, have an outline of the widest point of the skull, the cheekbones, the jawbone. And now you can start to move around the sculpture and build out the roundness of the forms from each angle and start to develop the features like the cheeks, like the nose, like the areas around the eyes, the clay around the lips, around the chin, and angles like the 3/4 view, where you can kind of see the shape of the cheek. Those are really important. So just start moving around your sculpture using those references that you took earlier, and then observe the exact angle that you're observing of your reference. Make sure that that's the angle you're working on your sculpture, and just slowly move around the entire sculpture. Don't neglect areas like the back of the head. Those are easy areas to forget just because they're not as interesting. But if you don't get enough mass and the right shape of the back of the head, then you'll really struggle getting a likeness of the person. So work all the way around. Don't neglect any areas, and just take one angle at a time. Don't think about it as, oh, I'm sculpting a cheek right now. This is what a cheek looks like. Think of it just as, I'm sculpting the silhouette from this angle. What does that silhouette look like? What does that outline look like on the model? and then does that match my sculpture? Oh no, there's just a little bit more clay in this area, or maybe I need to remove a little bit of clay here for the eye socket. And so you're just matching silhouettes as you're turning the sculpture around, working from every angle. Okay, step number 9 is the secondary forms and details. So this is when you're coming in and you're starting to try to establish the shape of all of the features a little bit more accurately. So you're coming in and you're starting to sculpt the lips. You're starting to add the shape and forms of the lips, the eyelids and the forms around the eyes, the nostrils of the nose, the eyebrows, the hairline, and giving an indication of the hair and the forms of the hair, thinking about those things as just shapes and forms in space. And if you've done the previous step accurately, then this step should be a lot easier because you know that you've placed that outline correctly and you know that that looks about right. You can pay attention to those secondary forms, things like the lips, like the nostrils, like the ears, and start to push and pull the forms to try to get it closer and closer to your model. And this systematic way of approaching these individual complex features and breaking it down into something more simple like a single angle, just the profile of that feature, that makes you much more likely to be able to find success sculpting whatever it is that you're sculpting. And then 10, the final step is texturing, making sure that there's a consistent texture throughout the sculpture. If you want to have it be kind of a loose texture of just you adding pieces of clay by hand, maybe there's some fingerprints and things, I think those textures can work well, especially if you're doing a larger sculpture. You can also go with a smoother texture. I like what I call a lightly tooled texture, where I take a flat tool and I just kind of press it against the surface to get rid of the texture that comes from me just adding pieces of clay. And so I'll kind of push clay around with this flat, rounded tool. And that's a texture that I like, but you have to decide what texture you want to go with. Texturing can take a while, especially if you're going for a more realistic texture. So that's what I like with my texture, but you have to decide what texture you want to go with. Now try these 10 steps and see how it goes. See if it doesn't make this a lot easier of a process to sculpt something as complex as the portrait. And I don't believe there's anything more difficult to sculpt than a well-done portrait sculpture of a specific person. But if you follow these steps, you're much more likely to succeed at it, and you'll get better and better the more that you do it. If you really want to dive into portrait sculpting, I definitely recommend checking out the full course at proco.com/portraitsculpt, where you can get all of the premium lessons and demos, 3D models, and there's just a bunch of information to help you with portrait sculpting. Even if you don't get that full course, you can go and create a free account over at proco.com. There's a bunch of free lessons. Upload images of the assignments from the course at proco.com to get feedback from myself and the Proco community. If you can make that investment of time and the energy it takes to upload those images of your work, you can start getting better at sculpting the portrait right now, today. It does take work, it does take effort, consistency, but if you follow the steps, you'd be surprised how fast you can improve. Hopefully this video helps. I look forward to hearing about how this process went in the comments. Please comment below if you tried it and if it helped. And if you tried it and it didn't help, then let me know what issues you had and what were the hardest steps of the sculpting process that you struggled with. If you have suggestions on future videos, then let me know that as well. As always, stay creative, stay productive, and hopefully I'll see you again soon in the next video.